we doing this? Sorry, then.
So the Plan Commission is called to order at 6:46. John, if you'd like to do the same for the CDA at 6:46, and then both bodies will have been convened.
Okay, we'll call the CDA meeting to order.
Thank you. And have you already taken attendance?
So I have for the Plan Commission, Barbara Kylie Miller, Therese Klein, Kate Flynn Post, Dan Wickland, and President Ann McKegg. For the CDA, I have John Kraus, Trustee Stokebrand, Jessica Carpenter, Trustee Ursink, and Wesley Warren.
Great, thank you very much. All right, we have one item on the agenda. The reason why we wanted to have this joint meeting was because we've been doing a lot of discussion and review of the Public Works facility and its current and future needs. Depending on the outcome, the action taken by the village board in the future, it may or may not involve a role for the CDA or the Plan Commission. And so we wanted to take this time, since we haven't had a lot of activity on the Plan Commission or the CDA, to bring these bodies up to speed, make sure you know where the information lies, and if you have questions so that you can be educated. So with that, I will hand it over to Manager Ewald, and I also want to just publicly thank staff for putting this together.
Thanks, President McKegg. So I have a number of slides for you that I'm going to go through rather quickly, so don't be daunted if you see a number of them, because I've found myself answering different questions from various groups, and it's been, yes, Barbara?
We have on our agenda that we should be approving the Plan Commission and the CDA minutes first. Do we want to get that out of the way before the presentation gets going?
Yes, please do.
I'll make a motion to approve the July 25th minutes of the Plan Commission.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are accepted as presented. Thank you, Barbara Kylie Miller. John?
And I'll make a corresponding motion to approve the March 10th, 2023 Community Development Authority meeting minutes.
Second.
Great. Any other discussion or? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. I think we're good.
All right, back to you, Rebecca.
All right. So tonight we're going to talk about the future of the Public Works facility. As you know, we have a built environment here in Shorewood, and critical to that environment and the quality of life and identity we have lies our Public Works Department, because they really are a lifeblood for the well-functioning built environment that we have here. We provide a variety of services. We have over, and I apologize on my screen, this is really small. We have over 70 lanes of roads and streets, thousands of signs and historic buildings, over 100 vehicles and pieces of equipment within our fleet. We have a number of public streets, public buildings, village parking lots, and contracted lots, and also the school district lots and various parks within the municipality in which we maintain. It's interesting that over the course of the village's 100+ history, all of our facilities, with the exception of Public Works, has been enhanced or updated for purposes of services. So, here you see the prior police station, fire station, public library, village hall, and really the only building that we have not brought up to date for purposes of services is Public Works. Over the last 2 decades, there has been 7 studies conducted with regards to this facility. And all of those studies have interrelated common themes that relay very similar information. 15 years ago, within one of those studies, it was deemed that that facility and its usefulness and how it was being utilized for purposes of our operation was noted to be at a tipping point. There's inadequate space to actually store our fleet and some of our most expensive trucks and equipment. It forces sometimes mechanics to work outside during inclement weather to fix equipment. It's very inefficient to park vehicles within the scope of the building. And really, there's just lack of space in general, whether that be for employees to physically operate the machinery and equipment, but also just for basic training and ADA needs. When all of these studies, they have all common themes, 2 that are just easy, quick hits that when you look at from a business perspective, you know, if you just tackled 2 utility costs. As an example, in 2020, we budgeted $172,680 for utility costs in the facility alone. Just north of us in Whitefish Bay, they have a newer facility. Their utility costs are $40,000. So when you look at that over the course of time, you know, since we've been identified to have this tipping point, dollars that could have been saved. We also have that dynamic with something we encounter every day, which is accessing and parking the fleet. It takes about 3,500 staff hours every year, an estimated $145,000 just in time to reorganize that equipment. And I guess I put it in perspective for people this way. When you have a building that's stacked, multiple vehicles and large trucks back, and you're called in the middle of a snowstorm and you're out in the middle of the night, you're spending a half an hour with everyone in those vehicles moving out of the lot. And then at the end of the night or early morning hours, getting back into those buildings if you can, given those situations. So it's just, it sounds simple, but it really does take up a significant chunk of time. All of the studies also provided the recommendation to develop a plan for replacing the existing DPW facility to improve efficiency and safety. And that, in the most recent study in 2021 was at the forefront. It was the first thing that they had suggested we pursue. When you boil it down, because this can be a complicated topic for people, really the decision hinges on 2 options. Do we rebuild a facility on our current site, or do we move facilities to a new site? And below that, you'll see on the screen, there's just different dynamics that are created with either option. But you really have to take a small step into deciding a pathway for that in order to have more detailed discussions. So to recap, here's what we know. All of the studies over the last 15 years, they all have the same common themes. They all recommend that we look to see where a new facility can be located, whether that be in an existing site or a different site. We know that we have an inefficient layout because it lacks space to meet modern needs. We have safety hazards within the buildings for employees. We're not compliant with ADA. It provides a difficult environment to recruit and retain employees at all levels within the department. We have a human cost for DPW staff, and that we've kind of lacked to acknowledge those working conditions and worker safety for our employees over the last several years. It's not environmentally sustainable. Just the energy inefficiencies alone are large. One of the reasons why this is high on my radar screen is because by 2027, we would need to stick another 1.5 million within to the facilities to just maintain it and have it be operable. We're also going to likely need to repave the entire site to meet PECFA regulations because we have environmental contamination on our site. And we have a retaining wall on the site, which is in extremely poor condition. Other things that we know, this parcel is located within tax increment District 3. So the wall, renovation of that wall and utility relocation could be, if if it was redeveloped for a taxable use and consistent with the project plan parameters, those costs potentially could be funded through that TID district. However, the TID will not cover expenses associated with redevelopment of a non-taxable village use. I'm seeing a hand raised, but I can't see who it is.
It's me, it's Jessica.
Okay.
And maybe this is part of the conversation later, but has there been any study or any conversation about consolidating services with other municipalities? Like, knowing Whitefish Bay is right next door, is that a possibility to consolidate some services? I mean, their population-wise is, basically the same as ours. Like, have we explored that route at all?
You know what, Jessica, I am going to be talking about that in a little while. So if we can park the question for now, and then I can come back.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good. So after we concluded that discussion with the village board, they moved forward with retaining a consultant, Barrientos Design, to conduct a study. The study had 3 phases. One was, let's determine what the facility needs. So based upon what our services are and modern needs, what square footage do we need for the services we deploy? Number 2, they were charged with evaluating different sites to see what potential other locations in addition to our current location could be available and serve the purposes of these services. And then the board was requested to move 3 of those sites forward to concept design. So here's some of the things we learned. They went through, they looked at each service area, they measured out based upon the trucks we have, the equipment we have, how we provide services, the various square footage and industry standards for what we need to meet those services. What's the important takeaway about all of that are primarily 3 things. One, in addition to just the physical buildings, there's other areas within the yard that require dedicated square footage, such as tempered storage, a salt shed, brine tanks, a transfer station, yard storage, and then also parking. Our optimal space needs require about 81,000 square feet, which is about a 70% increase over our 57,000 square feet we have on the current site. So in general, we need about 5.5 acres in order to accommodate these services. We only have about 3.1, 3.2 on the existing site. Want to back up 1 second. Jessica had talked a little bit about shared services. We currently have a shared service agreement with the village of Whitefish Bay for our transfer station components. Most people don't know what a transfer station means, so we kind of show it in red here on our current site. It actually involves a number of pieces of equipment, 2 compactors, an electronic pit and scale, a spotter, and a case loader. Essentially, what happens in this location is that garbage trucks or leafs come into the site on those trucks. They back up to compactors, dump either the refuse or the leaves into those compactors. It compacts it, holds it, and then waste management will come and haul off those trailers of compacted materials when they become filled. The transfer station supports multiple, well, pretty much all of the staff performed collection services that we provide. So residential curbside refuse, street and park refuse, can collection, small. Oh, great. Thanks, Joe, for muting. Special bulky item collections, they perform and collect the debris from Saturday residential dumping. They also are used in the curbside bagged yard waste collection, the curbside chipped brush collection, and with all of our leaf collection. So the transfer station was determined to be the most critical service that we need to evaluate to say, do we want to keep the same level of service? If so, it's the one that really impacted space, meaning that we don't need additional space if we don't have this station. For two reasons, just because of the amount of space that the equipment takes on the ground, but then also the space required for semis and trucks to be able to get in to get those compactors in and out of the site. Barrientos, when they were in, they conducted three public workshop sessions with the public, and then presented 4 times with the village board, 5 times with the village board. We also conducted a survey relative to the services that we provide with the transfer station to gauge public opinion. Of those people that responded, regarding, because on the site we have aged buildings that were constructed at a time with Henry Hingles, who's the same architect for the fire station. We asked the question to the public regarding the old buildings on the current website. Do you have a preference if we keep the buildings? Do you prefer the buildings to be preserved for another purpose besides DPW? And, do you prefer that they are maintained for public works? And you'll see, we don't have a statistically sufficient sample, but for those that did respond, most people wanted them to be maintained, but they didn't have a preference as to whether it be for our operations or another use. The second question was whether the facility should be located on another site outside of the village or on the existing site, or for those people who don't have a preference. And the majority said that they would be comfortable with the site being relocated within a 1 to 2 mile radius of the village. We went through this conversation, community input, and the board moved 3 sites forward for conceptual options to accommodate these services. One being the current location on Morris Boulevard with and without a transfer station. And the option that does not have the transfer station, it was envisioned that the transfer station would need to be located in another site somewhere outside of the village. Without an identified location at that point in time. The majority of trustees preferred to maintain our current service level. There is also a site on North Fulton Avenue that was evaluated in East Vienna Avenue. For purposes of our conversation this evening, I'm gonna gloss over some of these options, show them to you generally, and then we're gonna upload this presentation with the packet to the website at a later time. There's a lot more detail within our website page for all of these sites, should you want to review them in more detail, but we're going to cover them just briefly. This is just an overlook of our current public works site without a transfer station. This is what a 3D rendering would look like of a new building on our current site. As you drive into the site, you'll notice that over here on the right side of the screen, it almost looks a little bit glossy. That is a completely new retaining wall along the entire edge of the property. Here, this is the existing property. You can see that these gray boxes, smaller gray boxes, are the garages for the properties located on Morris. And so that retaining wall really just backs up to all of that garage area. It's also under a main trunk line for We Energy lines. This is what the site could look like with maintaining the main building. That people generally, when they enter public works, consider to be the public works location. It has kind of a castle-like feel when you see it from the front. This also accommodates the transfer station in the back, but does not have sufficient room for all of the other operations. This is a site that was identified on Vienna. This accommodates for a new facility. It also would require additional space on a neighboring property for purposes of the transfer station for all of those services to be held in one location. Here's a 3D rendering of something that it could look like from the corner. At the next step, the board is at a point where now that we've conceptually evaluated, we know what space needs we have. The next step for us as a community is really to advance one site for preliminary design. And for this, it would be a deeper dive on grading, paving, stormwater management, utilities, retaining walls, based upon where it is, whether in the village or outside of the village, what those municipal requirements would be, which takes about 6 months to evaluate. We also need to explore, again, pardon me, Jessica, I'm still calling you Trustee Carpenter. To Jessica's point of interagency cooperation, what level of service sharing could we have with other municipalities, including also Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee? When we started this conversation, a public works employee heard us talking about a new facility, and he said, "Oh, well, when am I going to see that next year?" And so I wanted to do some level setting in terms of expectation with people. And while you can't see a lot of these numbers on the plan, it really, if we were to do the 6-month evaluation of a site that we had solidified in 2023, it would take us about 4 years to get to completion of facility improvements and how we're operating. So, many people have asked me, well, if we don't need a lot of improvements to happen to the site until 2027, why are you talking about it now? These things take time. There's those conversations with our other jurisdictions to see where there could be areas of synergy between our operations, but none of these steps happen in a vacuum, and they take a period of time. So planning and foresight on behalf of our community is important to do that. Starting this year, we started to accommodate for the costs that would be involved over a 4-year timeline in our long-range financial plan. We put this plan together once every year in May. It's a guide or a tool, and not meant to be something to lock us into costs in any particular year, but give us a reflection of what those costs may, how they may impact our tax rate and other areas in the village. Now, at the same time, we're talking about public works and with another committee and the CDA and the board, we've been talking about and approved the extension of TID number 1 for purposes of affordable housing in 2021. What that means is that we kept that TID open for an additional year to capture increment of about 2.1 million at that time for purposes to fund affordable housing. In the state statute, it requires that 75% benefit affordable housing at a minimum, and the remaining 25% can be used on affordable housing, but can also be utilized by the municipality to improve the housing stock. When this initially happened, it became very clear that everyone was at a different level of education and involvement in understanding affordable housing. We were also starting to hear about it throughout the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, because it was becoming a topic for how businesses and our quality of life in the county is maintained, and as we look forward for the next several decades. We in the village put together an educational series that was started by the CDA, and we partnered with the Shorewood Library and other organizations in the Milwaukee area to spotlight housing. What does this mean? Because Shorewood doesn't exist in a vacuum. We're a part of a larger county and system. And so this is the series that was put out there. Our next presenter is actually one of the individuals who we met on the journey, who was about a full year or two ahead of us in the discussion and the process. while focusing on more affordable housing in Milwaukee County. But this is some of the information that we had asked for all of you to take a look at. For those plan commissioners who haven't had an opportunity to be engaged in any of these, they're all videoed and recorded online. Following that educational series, the CDA had decided to explore a rental offense approach. For those of you who aren't aware, in 2020, we had a housing study done on the village of Shorewood, and we were 53% tenant-based. And what the study told us is that we have actually a really good stock of affordable housing, or things that are units that could be considered affordable. They're just not being occupied by people who would necessarily require that affordability. So the CDA stepped back and looked at our existing inventory and said, well, let's focus perhaps on vouchers or modifying some of our multi-tenant or multi-unit housing to be affordable. And in the conclusion of that research and review, we determined that internally within the own administration of the village, we don't have enough staff capacity and we don't typically function in the capacity of a loan agent. And we can't administer some of these programs at a level of detail that would be required. At the same time, and I know that the Plan Commission has seen some of this, the CDA has seen some of this, and we've had this discussion, meaning staff, when exploring different topics of more affordable housing in Shorewood. We have challenges when it comes to redevelopment that have been here for a number of years. The cost of the land here is high in comparison to some of our suburban counterparts. We have small lot sizes, which can reduce the size and the scale of a development so that it's not as cost effective to build again or redevelop. We have zoning limitations. At the same time, we've been educating ourselves on housing and affordability. We also, adopted some commercial guidelines within our highest area of multi-unit housing on Oakland and Capitol to restrict height there to 4 or 5 stories. So sometimes in communities, when they're limited on the amount of size they have on the ground to develop, really the only area they have to go is up. So that was just another thing that came into play there. What we're all very well of is that we also have parking needs, right? Most of our multi-unit development that was constructed years ago was constructed without the need for parking at the time. And that is a demand that we have within our neighborhoods. And we need to just call out the fact that we live in close neighborhoods. So, within those confines in close neighborhoods, there can be different values and opinions about what you'd like to see next to your home that's already there. And all of those just equate to higher construction costs. One of the primary reasons why I was excited to kind of talk to all of you about this was that I got the question, hey, what's my role, right? We have the CDA who has specific tasks that they work on, the Plan Commission and the Village Board. One that I failed to cover here tonight, my apologies, Bart, is the Design Review Board, who also has other distinct functions, but wanted to just kind of call out as we move forward and just kind of address the question of when will you see something? So for those people in the CDA, and this is in their bylaws and their mission, they provide recommendations to the board on the Central Business District Master Plan, and they periodically update that plan. They provide recommendations on redevelopment. They prepare and implement our TID financial management guidelines. They created the first guidelines our municipality has ever had in 2021. They evaluate and prepare TID plans and financial projections for how those TIDs would work, an annual report of those expenditures, revenues, and other programs and initiatives that they take on. They prepare and implement redevelopment assistance criteria, including recommendation developer agreements for specific projects. They prepare and administer business and development recruitment and retention assistance activities, And they also act as the village's housing authority per state statute. The Plan Commission has a different role and function. So should the state statute or a village ordinance require, the CDA may be required to submit recommendations to the Plan Commission prior to submitting them to the Board of Trustees. So recommendations from the Plan Commission typically come in the form of resolution to the board, and the village board can also ask them to provide recommendations on different matters. But in general, their charter is to prepare community plans and recommend their adoption to the village board. This Plan Commission just recently went through that process with the adoption of the Comprehensive Plan 2040. The group adopts and administers our zoning ordinances, land division ordinances, development standards, and some of the implementation tools we have located within our code. They conduct and provide for public participation opportunities and education of the community as to how these plans are developed, and then how we go about implementing those programs. And the Plan Commission reviews development for specific land use development proposals that may also impact zoning amendments that may be requested, conditional use permits, and plan unit development reviews. Village board wears then yet another different hat. In some, they take all these recommendations and then they are the final body to take those and act on them. But in addition to that, there are some other things that I wanted to kind of call out and distinguish. When there's acquisition of land by eminent domain or other methods, the CDA might provide a recommendation to that, and the village board would then be called to act on whether that was the way to proceed. While the CDA and the Plan Commission provide recommendations on TID creation, the CDA and development agreements, or TID-related expenditures, the village board also has action authority on those recommendations. The board can issue debt other than conduit debt, which is a specific type of debt that's available to the CDA. They can propose contracts requiring the use of municipal funds. So in essence, if a developer is going to be incentivized by the use of those funds, they can make requirements of how they are used and for what purpose. And then also any amendments or additions to the current CDA bylaws and rules of procedure. So that brings us to today. So in the memo, I talked a little bit, for us to kind of, as staff, as we work on this project, it comes down to two things. We're going to need some direction as we move forward on the future of the Public Works facility. Specifically, location of the future facility, whether it be our current site or a different site. And if it's on a different site, what the future of our existing Public Works site becomes. We're also going to need some direction on the utilization of TID1 extension funds. There's no timeline in which we need to use those funds. So they're in a segregated fund, ready to be used for those purposes. One of the reasons why the Public Works site and the use of affordable housing funds comes into play in this discussion is the fact that, number one, the Public Works site is currently under village ownership. It is one of the largest parcels that's currently under, or I would say, not meeting its best use at its current time. So it could be repurposed for purposes of housing, whether that be affordable or just market rate housing. People have talked about that from a number of different perspectives in terms of generating revenue to help pay for a new facility and services. They've also talked about it within the scope of more affordable housing, because we know that we're limited with our zoning criteria within areas of commercial use for that. This area is not located within our commercial district. It's located outside of that. There's also a very significant grade change between where other properties are located from a grade perspective in comparison to where the site currently sits, which may be more receptive to additional stories of development. None of those things have been acted upon or talked about in anything more than conceptual at this point in time. But the CDA has had some discussion of, oh, okay, well, if we did have land, what would those pathways be to providing more affordable housing, and what would those look like? And so tonight, and I'll pause for a second, but you know, Teague Whaley Smith, who is the executive director of the Community Development Alliance, is here this evening, and he's going to talk about some pathways to affordability, pathways to housing that could be utilized by our community in order to determine how to use those affordable housing funds. Where we are now, and this gets back again, Jessica, to one of your questions, we're currently in communication with Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee and trying to identify what services do we have in Public Works, the area of Public Works, that could have some synergy. You know, could that be on collectively having a transfer station in another location? Could that be in, you know, consolidating one service or another? They are in the process, both at the county level and the city level, of inventorying their current public works facilities and also needing to reorganize some of their services in different ways to meet their service expectations in their own areas. So we're continuing to have that conversation. In addition, Bart Griepentrog, our planning and development director, is conducting a more detailed review of the 3 sites that the board had moved forwards for some further evaluation. While a consultant can be utilized for that work, sometimes we've felt it's been more beneficial to have some of our staff work with the City of Milwaukee staff to take a look at some of that information before making further decisions on how to explore different site accommodations. And then at last, we're still entertaining additional site options. So as things come up or as we speak to more people, we continue to look at different opportunities that could be available. I just want to, before I kind of wrap up, I wanted to share that while I'm the one in front of you providing the information on this presentation, it's really been a collaboration of different members of our staff based upon the talents that we bring to the table. So I'm joined in this project in partnership with our Director of Public Works, Leanne Butchlick, and then also Bart Griepentrog, who's on the call tonight. And I see Trustee Stokebrand, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to follow up a little bit because we do have the transfer station agreement with Whitefish Bay. They are our closest neighbor. Glendale is also really close. Fox Point is facing a situation with their public works facility too. And I know I've asked this before, and I'm hoping that we're reaching out to more municipalities besides the city and the county, which we don't have a lot in common with in many different areas. And I just hope that we're continuing to look at the northern suburbs. And I hope that we're also continuing, I believe that the latest state budget included some sort of incentives for collaboration, consolidation, and cooperation. And we should look at those options too. And I hope so. Can you tell me where we are with those other municipalities?
Well, the Village of Whitefish Bay, we have a transfer station agreement with them that's going to expire in 2025. So they too will need to be at the table as we make decisions with regards to the transfer station. To date, they've expressed the desire to continue use of a joint transfer station. Whether that will continue to be that case as that contract comes to a conclusion, they'll need to weigh in on that. I know that our Public Works Committee, I think our village board, it's been about a year or two, we actually went to go visit the Whitefish Bay Public Works facility, which is landlocked and doesn't have any additional area for growth with their current operations. They have a site that they store some of their equipment on, but that also has some environmental contamination, which has restricted them from utilizing the site in different ways. But when we talk about partnering with other municipalities, it's also, we're looking at distance to get there, back and forth based upon what that service level is, and then the service level expectation of the community. So, and they vary, between the different communities. So, as we continue, Barrientos was clear that we need to first figure out what we're gonna do with the transfer station and the services associated with it, because it does impact all of those services that our employees currently provide customer service for. Then I think once we have that, an answer, a solution to how to move forward, then I think we can start, exploring some other service areas and options. Caitlin Post. Oh, I think you're muted, Kate.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It's quite a complex undertaking, it appears, and there's a lot that's going into this over numerous years, it sounds like. So I'm trying to understand, so the transfer station is the first kind of decision point, it sounds like. Is that correct?
For service level expectation. Right. So,
what's the timing for that decision to be made? And is the village board considering that separate from the affordable housing plan, or is I see that the affordable housing planning is being talked about, this parcel and the best use for this site. And I think it's great to be creative and innovative with, all of our village assets. At the same time, I would want us to be very deliberate and stepwise in our approach to maintaining and preserving the level of services that residents have come to expect and want to have moving forward. So I'm just kind of trying to understand which comes first in terms of the decision-making process.
Well, I can tell you that as we've embarked on just this last study with Barrientos, there are kind of three components that we find ourselves in all the time. One's the policy decision, the realm and those decisions from the board. Another is service expectation. And then, how we work with those to deploy services that we currently provide. Do we want the same level of service, different level of service, and then how do we deploy in that service or that service expectation? So, I don't know if they can all be done in a vacuum or in a silo. I think it's been one of the reasons, perhaps they're challenging questions. So I don't know if there's an exact ingredient or a recipe, but right now we're continuing to explore the transfer station discussion and sites outside of the village with Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee. And we're currently having those discussions while evaluating other future sites. And I'll let, Trustee Stokebrand raise her hand. I don't know if you were looking to respond to Kate Flynn Post.
Thank you. Yes, I guess, if we can move the whole public works facility to River West, including the transfer station, why couldn't we just move the transfer station? I mean, honestly, when I've been in that neighborhood and I see those semi-trailer trucks of garbage driving through across from the intermediate school, it doesn't seem like a good fit. And so I would like to see us pursue that, moving that transfer station. If staff says they can provide the same service level with the transfer station in River West, then maybe we should look at moving that, at least that piece, out of the village. I know there are some people with strong feelings that the site remain a public work, that public works remain in the village. Well, there's no place to put it except where it is. There have been ideas about putting a baseball stadium at the public works site. I've heard that the bid got an idea about putting entertainment and retail at the public works site. So there's a lot of ideas, but I guess I'm really starting at this from the public works approach. And the thing that doesn't fit very well at all yet at the site with me anymore is if we're already, like Whitefish Bay is letting us basically run the transfer station right now. What if we let someone else run the transfer station somewhere else that is geographically close so we can still maintain our pickup? I think when we're talking about service levels, it's hard to know what we're talking about, but, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Bart or Rebecca, when we talk about service levels, we really need to talk about how frequently your garbage will be picked up. And so I think that makes it much more manageable in terms of getting your heads around service levels. Like if you still want to have your garbage picked up once a week and you're recycling every 2 weeks, it's been presented to me, or my understanding is that, it has to be fairly close. So that leaves, where we are or River West. I think the things we haven't also looked at with a River West site is, what's it going to be like for security in River West? Security, insurance, we'll have to make some sort of a payment in lieu of taxes. I mean, I understand, there's savings to be had. Obviously, we get a new building, we're going to have lower utility costs. But, this is something else in my mind that I need to see down the road is what are, the crime rate in River West is different than in Shorewood. And what will the payment in lieu of taxes be? Security, things like that. It's just, that kind of a move is going to be, it just need a lot more information. Thank you.
Barbara Kylie Miller.
Thanks. I had a similar question about that transfer station. If the decision is made that we want to keep the DPW activity department trucks at the current site, could we just transfer the station to another location within 1 to 2 miles of Shorewood? And what would that do to the DPW's efficiency? Having 2 locations and then again, having to, whether everything's together or just the transfer station is relocated, having to have the drivers, go a distance, 1 or a couple miles, either to Whitefish Bay or to River West. I have some other questions too, just based preparing for this, but that's my immediate question.
It's a good one. So right now we operate the transfer station, and to Trustee Stokbrand's point, if we weren't operating this the transfer station, then we wouldn't have such an issue because we would have our employees still in one site for deploying services. We don't know if we would have a partner that would be willing and able to operate a transfer site in another location yet. So that's still a question that's out there. And Bart, if I miss anything on my next response relative to our current site, please chime in. But right now on the current site, there are 2 concept designs that were put together by Barrientos. One just accommodates for the majority of space we actually need for our fleet and outdoor storage requirements. However, it does not maintain any of the existing buildings on the site. If the existing building is maintained, and when I say the existing one, it's primarily the one that we identify with when we reference the public works site that you see right when you come into the lot. If that were kept, there still would not be sufficient room for that we would need for all of our other operations on the site. And that's kind of how we looked at that. That building itself is split up in so many different ways on the interior. And the way it was designed initially, with an incinerator and for horse and buggy to kind of drop garbage down there, it has a different structural system that wouldn't be conducive, for example, for like blowing out all the walls in the middle in order to provide larger spaces for storage. So we kind of paused on that discussion and further evaluation at the time because it would have required a deeper dive. Bart, did I miss anything? No? Okay.
So it sounds like it's a little different than our renovation of the fire station, which we could kind of keep the shell and then renovate the interior to meet current needs.
Correct. In fact, just to kind of follow up on that a little bit, the consultant actually, when looking at it based upon what we need from a space needs component had said, well, it's really only tempered storage. That's the only thing that you could put there. And so when you have to look at the things that you would actually need to store to do that, and so when you look at what you could build tempered storage for versus renovating something for purposes of tempered storage, they're just different things to evaluate as that discussion continues.
In my mind, we need to separate the two discussions and decisions about the best decision for the DPW and to maintain the services we have in the village and that residents expect. And then once that decision is made, then we need a whole different community conversation about the best use of that space. Whether that is, a pocket neighborhood with smaller homes or, rental homes, maybe partnering with Habitat for Humanity. We've all heard or read online the concerns of residents on Morris with the traffic and the safety issue of the students going to SIS. So this thought of, say, a high-rise apartment building with increased traffic on there, you're just replacing the trucks with maybe potentially another safety hazard. So, there's a lot of different possibilities that we could do with that space, extend Hubbard Park, have a community center for teenagers, in the existing building. But I think it seems like primarily you want to decide what's the best decision for the DPW and not think like, oh yeah, but if we moved it, then we could do this. It's like, that's really like a whole nother conversation. I mean, I'm all for the affordable housing conversation and the need for that. And in one of the sessions, I can't remember which one it was, one of the presenters had said that really the best place for public housing is near public transit, and mentioned the Oakland and Capitol intersection. We have a little space on that surface parking lot to do something. So anyway, those were just the thoughts I had, going through those 8 sessions and the presentations and thinking about, okay, we've got this joint conversation, but, we kind of need to think of what do we want for our DPW services, and then what do we want to do with that space if the board decides it's best to move all of it or part of it elsewhere.
Right. Thank you. I think President McKay, you were next.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, excuse me, whether Mr. Whaley is going to speak tonight or share some information.
He is. I was actually just going to stop at Wesley Warren and then we have Joe. I was going to hit Wesley and then Joe and then turn it over to Teague.
Okay, thank you. I yield.
Thanks, Rebecca. I raised my hand and I had a lot to say, and then Barb took a lot of my comments, so I'm not sure how much more I have left to say. So I'll try to make this relatively quick because I know we do want to get on with Teague's presentation. But in thinking through this, I'm just trying to think the best. This is how I make decisions, the best rubric for making a decision. And I think it comes down to what the village priorities are. I mean, I would start with kind of do no harm in terms of preserving our services. That's something we heard a lot about, certainly when I was on the board. Historical buildings, preservation of historical buildings, and then balancing that out with kind of the highest and best uses of the land. And I don't know that you can do all 3 of those things. So I think it's really something where we just kind of prioritize what we want to do and go from there. Because especially with the preservation of historical buildings and highest and best use, I think those two might clash a little bit. And then even within highest and best use, you're looking at affordable housing, community space, extension of the park. What do you want to do? So I just think, once I think the answer becomes a lot clearer once you identify what you want to prioritize. And I think that's our challenge here. Just my thoughts.
Thank you. Joe Lesage.
Hey, has there been any discussion whatsoever of diminishing the services? Like 3 people have brought up maintaining our level of service. I'm just assuming that's a non-starter. So can we just not have that conversation? Be my point.
Right.
No
well, so that's
about
one of the
diminishing services, right? So
yeah.
Let's not talk about it.
That's one of the reasons why we did the survey as we were having the discussion, because we'd really not asked. And one of the largest services that's impacted is leaf collection. So if we don't have a transfer station, we can't collect leaves in the way that we do, which would require us to bag. And we don't even know if there's a vendor available. who would take bag leaves. And bag leaves wouldn't, it just, you all know, you're you're here. So that was, I think, a big driver for us, and we'd never asked the public. And we didn't have hundreds and hundreds of people respond, but of those who did, they had thoughts on it. And so I'm going to turn it over. Teague, are you able to share?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, perfect. I get the pleasure of having Teague over tonight. He thought the meeting was at Village Hall. He was like, Key West. And he showed up and he called. He's like, I can't get in. So I was like, come on over.
Is there any way to make sure that there were a lot of them that were not readable in the earlier one. Can we make the images in his presentation larger? Or maybe they have bigger type?
There's also a setting in Teams to focus on content that'll make it larger on your screen, eliminating the top and the bottom sides.
All right, thank you.
And review.
I'll do my best to describe things as we go forward. So thank you for having me, Teague Whaley-Smith, the Chief Alliance Executive for the Community Development Alliance. And I have had the pleasure of working with your CDA over the last year and a half to talk through different housing strategies. And we are learning through the process as well. So I want to share some information with all of you tonight. We all understand the huge importance of housing when it comes to quality of life on an individual basis, and families have better outcomes in education and healthcare, and neighborhoods have better, statistics in crime and otherwise. What we are learning by looking at some suburban communities is that there is a risk of significant displacement as housing costs have gone up significantly and housing values have gone up significantly. It can threaten the fabric of a neighborhood and why people chose to move into that neighborhood to begin with, specifically in the area of schools. So as the housing price goes up, it becomes more and more difficult for young families to purchase homes, and school enrollment tends to go down. And once school enrollment goes down, you have funding issues and other issues that happen that can impact the quality of schools. And it's sort of a very a detrimental cycle that communities can fall into if you don't have a good mix of housing to allow young people to move into the community. We've also seen a significant displacement of public employees, both in the public sector, schools, but also in public works and otherwise, that people have to leave their jobs because they have to move so far away from a community that the commute time doesn't make sense. So I think it's really wonderful that you guys are looking at this available housing issue. And the question has come up of how do you do this in a way to maintain available housing long term in a community? No one wants to see a significant subsidy go into a home ownership opportunity just to have that homeowner cash out and sell the property to somebody else, which is a real risk if you are not careful in how you do this. So we've really spent the last 6 months researching how do you make long-term available homes to each of the different income groups within a community, and shared that information with a group of about 100 people to get input from them on which pathways should be used when we're providing subsidies for affordable housing. So the conference was called Forever Affordable Conference. And what the problem we're trying to address and discuss is it can cost upwards of $250,000 to build an entry-level home, 1,000 square foot average affordable home in the Milwaukee County area. And that's true whether it's a duplex unit or whether it's a townhome unit. And multifamily construction actually turns out to be much higher. It turns out to be about $300,000 per unit. And the target market for hitting racial equity purposes is about $120,000. So it can cost about $130,000 to subsidize a home. And you don't want to run the risk of building a $250,000 home, selling it for $120,000 just to have somebody the next year flip and sell that property for $300,000, and now you're back in the same spot that you were, which has actually happened in the state of Wisconsin before when there wasn't thought around these issues. There's even thought about if you're just providing $10,000 of down payment assistance, what pathway should be followed when it comes to preserving affordability. So this stuff has been figured out for the first sale. There's all kinds of protections that are well practiced by homebuyer counseling agencies, Habitat for Humanity, other nonprofit developers, that the first family that purchases a home, we have methods to income restrict them and restrict them to owner occupancy. And you check that documentation at closing, and that's a well settled practice. What we need to really discuss is what happens on the second sale when that family decides to sell. Are we going to put an owner occupancy restriction? How would you actually technically do that? Who enforces it, etc.? So we've developed a spectrum to help share a vocabulary as we discuss these issues, and I'll run through each of these where the text is bigger. But they range from market-only activity. Nobody's building $250,000 homes and selling them for $120,000. The market's not going to take care of this problem that we're having of income in our communities. A second example is no restrictions at all. You just sell the home for $120,000 and the homeowner can sell it the next day, which I think is the problem we're trying to solve. So here are some potential solutions. One is a nonprofit option to purchase. So in this example, after the person purchases it for $120,000, if they're going to sell it, the next year for $300,000, they have to offer it to a nonprofit first before they sell it on the market, and then the nonprofit can decide whether or not it's a good deal or not. Another option is an owner occupancy restriction. This is a common tactic in newer subdivisions that are market rate, that there's a homeowners association and part of the deed that you're buying says this has to be homeowner occupied, no Airbnbs, no renting this property out. Doing that in a community that doesn't have homeowner association begs the question, who enforces that in the future? Is that a role of a quasi-governmental entity or a nonprofit, et cetera? You can't just put a homeowner deed restriction on it and expect a title company to enforce it. This is a well-documented practice that those things are not followed because the banks and the title companies really don't care. It's the homeowner associations and municipalities that care. And then there's subsidy repayment. In the example of $120,000 selling a home, somebody sells it for $300,000, they've got to pay back the $130,000 subsidy. And then finally, there's the option of Forever Affordable. And what Forever Affordable does is it says that the homeowner that's purchasing it agrees that when they sell it, they're going to sell it to a similarly situated family. So if you're selling this for $120,000 because that's what the average person in Milwaukee County can afford, then the homeowner's agreeing when they're done with that property to sell it to a similarly situated family at an income restricted price. And I'll give you a specific example of how that's working for something that's called the Community Land Trust. So again, quickly here, market only activity. The developer builds for $250,000. The developer receives $0 in subsidy. The developer sells the home for $250,000. And that really is zero opportunities for families that are making $12 to $25 an hour. They just can't afford it. You have no restrictions. Again, developer builds for $250,000, receives $130,000 subsidy in this example. The developer sells for $120,000, and that creates a great opportunity for exactly one family. Because then that family can sell it to create wealth for their family, which can be an honorable goal, but may not meet your municipality's goal for available housing. And there's really zero protection against investors and displacement coming in and purchasing these homes. There's a story about a northern county, which I will not name, that about 20 years ago put in a ton of small entry-level homes in their market to serve a workforce and a tourist community. They didn't put on any restrictions, and those got purchased by vacationers from Chicago as second homes. So that's kind of the example and the horror story of no restrictions and why you want to put something in place. So the nonprofit option to purchase, similar example here, developer builds for $250,000. They receive the $130,000 in subsidy, but the developer records with the Register of Deeds a nonprofit option to purchase. So when the first homeowner is ready to sell to the second homeowner, they have to follow the rules of the option to purchase, which is, hey, I got a homeowner that's willing to buy this for $300,000, nonprofit, do you want to buy this for $300,000? and preserve it for affordability. So in this example, you're creating, again, one opportunity for that family and one opportunity for a nonprofit to buy it back. But in your market, that's challenging because you've already put $130,000 into a project. Are you really willing to put in another $300,000 to preserve it for the next family? Owner occupancy restriction, this is fairly intuitive. So a developer builds the home again, they receive the $130,000 subsidy, they record a deed restriction for owner occupancy restriction, and the developer sells the home for $120,000. Notice that there's no price restriction in this option. So you have the first opportunity for the first family, and you have infinite opportunities for future homeowners, but at any income. And if what you want to do is preserve available housing for working families making $12 to $25 an hour in the future, this by itself will not ensure that. The next option is subsidy repayment. So again, developer builds for $250,000. They receive the $130,000 in subsidy. The developer records a subsidy repayment requirement as a second mortgage on the property. The developer then sells that home to the first homeowner for $120,000. When that homeowner is ready to sell to the next homeowner, they would have to pay back that $130,000 subsidy. This is problematic because it's such a huge penalty for a family to do, and it particularly is damaging if the house isn't worth $250,000. So if you go south of here, you build a home for $250,000 and it's only worth $150,000. So you could really penalize somebody. But it's a serious option that Shorewood consider, because if you build an entry-level home, it's immediately going to be worth $300,000 in your market. So having a subsidy repayment is a viable tool. And then we get to forever affordable. What happens in a forever affordable home is the developer builds for $250,000. They receive the $130,000 subsidy. They put the land into a community land trust. And so what the property owner is buying is the home that has been built on the land. And they have a 99-year lease, so there's no fear of ever being displaced. And they are agreeing to sell it to a similar situated family in the future. And that can really create infinite opportunities for families in the future, and is really where most communities are headed to keep available housing for working families. So a few technicalities for those that aren't heavily involved in the real estate industry. In order to enforce these pathways, there's really a couple of requirements. One is you have to record a deed restriction, which is a legal document that requires future property owners to follow a certain set of rules. But then you also need a future organization to enforce the deed restrictions. These, again, aren't going to be enforced by title companies and banks. So this model of a community land trust can really have multiple variables. You could have a pathway that is limited by time. So for example, a common practice is that there's a subsidy repayment until you've lived in the property for 10 years. And then after 10 years, you don't have to repay it. You can limit it by participant income and focus on any income sector that you want. And then the pathway could have a limited resale price in really any of these formulas. It's also very flexible. It really doesn't matter what style of building you're building. Each pathway could be applied to a multi-unit townhome development or a high-rise development. It really doesn't matter. You could apply it to any of those situations. And the same with types of ownership. You could apply these in the circumstances if you're buying a condo unit, a co-op unit, etc. There are some features of forever affordable that people should understand, and those are, first and foremost, it is an anti-displacement measure, because the way that it works is that the affordable home is owned by the homeowner, but the land, again, is owned by the land trust. And the land trust is setting the resale formula. I'll share a resale formula in just about 30 seconds here. Property taxes are limited to the resale value rather than the market value. So if you take the example of building a townhome unit that's home ownership in Shorewood, and the resale restricted value is at $100,000, but the market value is $150,000 or $300,000. If it's in a land trust, it gets property taxed at the $100,000 level, not the $300,000 level. And that's a real risk here in Shorewood for whatever strategy. If you had Habitat for Humanity build homes, they're an incredible partner. Highly recommend exploring it with them. But the first thing that they're going to tell you is that they're going to build this home for $250,000, but the people that they're selling to can't afford the tax bill on a $250,000 home. So this is a nice way to do that. It, of course, will impact the overall property tax levy for the properties that you develop. And then also forever affordable homes don't require private mortgage insurance. Those of you in the real estate industry know that if you don't have a 20% down payment, you typically have to pay for private mortgage insurance, which can cost thousands at closing and thousands over time. But the way forever affordable homes work is that the bank is underwriting it for the market value, not for the resale value. So this can save homeowners thousands and make a home really affordable in a market like Shorewood. So here's an example of the Milwaukee Community Land Trust. So they built the home that you see there. It was a rehab project that cost them about $250,000. The market value was $130,000, and they sold it for $90,000. The land leased with the land trust is for 99 years, renewable for another 99 years. Nobody's lived to 198 yet, so there's no real risk there. And the owner can sell for their equity of 1.25% annually. So if they bought the home for, let's say, $100,000, they stand there for 10 years. That means they can sell the house for 12.5% more. So they could sell it for $112,500, and they will have equity of that $12,500 plus the mortgage that they've paid off. So they'd have equity of, probably 40 or 50,000 at that point. And so the homeowner makes equity, but now you have a home that's affordable for the next purchaser. So you're helping multiple generations, not just one. So lots of examples in different areas. Those of you that have driven through Milwaukee and seen the beautiful homes that are being built for $400,000 at Josie Heights and Walnut Circle, that's a market-only activity. There are some things that are happening with no restrictions right now. Habitat for Humanity uses a combination of a nonprofit option to purchase and a subsidy repayment. However, for them to break into a suburban market, they'll be the first to tell you that property taxes are a huge risk. And then we have the Milwaukee Community Land Trust homes that are forever affordable. So this framework is available online at housingplan.org. And we have lots of detailed information and examples and documents and for anybody that's interested in this framework, and really happy to continue the conversation with you all and answer any questions. We don't, either of us has a speaker on. Oh. Sorry, we'll be within you. We turned off our speakers because there was feedback.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much, Teague. That was really great. I don't know what we were planning. I don't know if we had a...
Sure. Rebecca is telling me to call on Joe.
Okay, thanks. I'll let you take over.
Oh, Joe, you're on mute.
That was great.
Oh, there you go.
That was great, Teague. Thanks. Hey,
oh, sorry. Hang on 1 second, Joe. We got to fix our speaker issue over here.
Okay.
Do you want to turn your speaker on, or should I turn?
You can turn it.
Turn my speaker on.
Thank you.
Joe, try one more time for me.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was enlightening. I know one problem people have with this is that when you restrict the sale price, one of the major benefits of owning the real estate is the appreciation and value you get. I know there's actually a court case out right now, high profile one, where a municipality is being sued on the basis of racism because a woman who lived in one of these houses that was deed restricted in the end for 30 years, paid her mortgage, is now feeling that she's being fairly treated because she can't benefit from the appreciation that the property went through. And I know that people have an issue with this, and that you basically, if you can't see all the upside from the sale of the real estate, you're not much better than a renter, except that you have to pay for the roof, the water heater, the furnace, and all that. And in the end, you didn't come out ahead. So how do you deal with that as a criticism?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is that community land trusts actually started as a racial equity program to be able to address this issue directly. because so many Black and brown people are forced into rental situations. And so what you really want to compare this is not to the fee simple ownership that many of us on this call are able to get, because that's completely unattainable for so many Black and Latino families. And so you're really comparing it to the rental situation. So in the rental situation, you pay for 30 years as an example, using the Milwaukee Community Land Trust model, and you would, after 30 years, leave that unit and you would have 0 equity. Whereas in the Milwaukee Community Land Trust, if you stayed there for 30 years, you would have paid off your $100,000 mortgage and you would be able to sell it for about $130,000. And so you have built $130,000 of equity in that model. So you really want to compare it to the current situation that Black and Latino folks are put in. I will say that the maintenance thing does need to be addressed. And that's why in circumstances like this, these are much better tactics for brand new homes and for complete rehabs, because now you've extended the life of the property for the next 30 years for somebody to be in it. This would be a really poor model if somebody is using it to buy a dilapidated home in order to do that. So it's a balance between those two situations. It's a balance between the renter that has no equity, which is the case for 70% of Black families in Milwaukee County, versus the complete home ownership where you have all of the equity. This is a compromise between the two, and it is a trade-off, and it's not for everybody. I think it's important to look at it not only from the homeowner's perspective, though, but also from the people that are providing that $130,000 of subsidy. And so if you're going to put $130,000 of subsidy into unit in partnership with other people, we need to ask the question, are you okay with one family benefiting from that public investment, or should it be spread through future generations? So, Joe, you've identified the crux of the issue, that it's a balance between those two. And there's a trade-off that's being asked for. And that trade-off is you're able to get a property that's worth $250,000, $300,000, and you're buying it for $120,000. And so you're asked to be giving something in return. I think Rebecca's going to tell me to call on Barbara.
I have a question. So if we decided to go with the land trust route, is that something that Shorewood sets up, or do we partner with an existing land trust? I mean, if Shorewood did it, and then we'd hire someone to manage that trust?
Exactly. Those would be your two options. So there's communities like in Minnesota that have had land trusts for longer, where there are more than 100 community land trusts, and people set up their own land trust. I think from the consultants that we've worked with, there's significant efficiencies at 100 units. So if you're going to do something that is 20 units as an example, then you're probably going to want to have somebody else and put it in somebody else's land trust rather than doing it yourself. Because if you just have 20 homes, you have the operating expenses of supporting the land trust and supporting the homeowners. So probably not until you have a plan for 100, you'd probably want to partner with somebody else. The primary player in town is the Milwaukee Community Land Trust. It is a nonprofit that has been set up that is interested in doing things countywide. You also have a counterpart in Wauwatosa that has set up a separate task force to ask the question, should there be an additional land trust focused on suburban properties? And it's really economies of scale question. Can we in the Milwaukee market support 2 different land trusts, or does it make sense to have one land trust with economies of scale?
Thank you.
I'll just leave you with, I can't emphasize, oh, sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
Thanks. So if I took $2.1 million, which is what we have, and I divide it by 130,000, which is what you thought the subsidy would be per house, we could do 16 families, right? Just doing some back of the envelope. But right now there's no land trust. Is that right?
Can I jump in? I know I wasn't called on. This is Joe. I went to say we're building these tiny houses. They're $387,000 each, not $250,000. That's my take on it.
Yeah, so we could definitely talk through costs. I think one of the big things, Kathy, is you're going to need to change the infrastructure of the site because it doesn't have all of the laterals, connections, and all that kind of stuff. So mentally, the way that I would think about it is, and we're happy to start working on this, but likely that $2.1 million is going to have to be used to clean up the site, provide the infrastructure, et cetera, in order to build these entry-level homes. And we would have to partner with you to raise that $150,000 per unit. Just to let you know, we have 173 homes in the pipeline in Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, where we've been able to raise the funds. We're getting the land for free there, and the infrastructure is already there as well. So that is part of the cost differential, but clearly not all the cost differential between our numbers and Joe's numbers.
So, but my understanding with the TID, because this is part of TID 3 yet, is if it goes back to taxable land, then we could use TID money. Is that not correct? So these homes, let's say under whatever circumstances they're built, let's say we can do 5. They would be taxed at the full Shorewood tax rate, right? They would get no tax break because they're getting a subsidy on the building of the house, right? And the buying of the house.
If you put them in a...
They would pay the same tax rate that everybody else who's a property taxpayer would pay.
They would pay the same tax rate, absolutely. Under the uniformity clause, you can't charge a different rate, but you can only tax a homeowner for the property as it is restricted. And in this circumstance, they would have a restricted sales price. So you would probably be taxing them at the $120,000 assessment rather than a $300,000 assessment, but they'd absolutely be paying the same rate.
Okay, so, but in general, then the property taxpayers of Shorewood, besides the $2 million set aside, we would continue to pay to subsidize this in perpetuity.
No, you'd be gaining income from because right now the property doesn't have any income on it.
Right.
And say you did 16 homes and they were worth $100,000 each, you'd have a $1.6 million tax base there, and you would be collecting taxes from those folks. Whether you decided to use that as increment to pay for other things would be your decision. But no, this is not, it wouldn't anticipate any additional subsidy. Those homeowners would be paying taxes like everybody else.
But not on the market rate.
Yeah, not on an unrestricted sale rate, correct.
And that lower rate would continue in perpetuity.
That lower assessed value would go into perpetuity, yes.
And so the Milwaukee County Land Trust is not in a position right now to do this in a suburb. Is that what you're saying?
No, no suburb is positioned to provide inventory for the land trust. The barrier is not the Milwaukee Community Land Trust. The barrier is the land and infrastructure cost in communities and suburbs. And you guys are closer to any of the suburbs that we're working in to figure that out. So I think that there is a path forward. Again, you guys very eloquently stated, you got to figure out what you're going to do with your public works site first. But to the extent that this is a viable reuse, I think that we could partner with you guys to figure out how to do, 20 homes, for example, in that area if they fit. Through the combination of sources that you bring in and the combination of sources that we could bring in.
And then my only final question is then, would we pay MCLT for their management for vetting and?
Yeah, the way that it works is that, they raise a significant amount of resources. And what happens is that the homeowner is paying a $50 lease payment each month. So that's part of the way that they raise resources. That doesn't come close to covering their costs. They have to raise money as any nonprofit does. And there's lots of, this is where most of the foundations and other folks are headed. So there's been, you might have seen a big investment by Northwestern Mutual as an example to invest in the Milwaukee Community Land Trust and provide them some capital to work with.
So there might be some nonprofit money there to pay for the administrative fees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think mentally, if you want to think about this, I would say if you guys could figure out how to clean up the land and provide the utilities, the gap would be about $150,000 per home. And we could probably help you raise about $100,000 per home to do this. So if you could figure out how to kick in 50,000 into the actual unit, I think we're well on our way to figuring this out.
Thank you.
Kathleen?
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really informative, and I really appreciate your ongoing expertise in this conversation that we're having as a community. My question was about matching funds, and so you're kind of touching upon that a little bit. I'm wondering if there are any additional ARPA funds at the county level. In my research into this issue as to what other municipalities are doing, I'm seeing this leveraging of resources, whether it's county or state or the federal tax credits, and now you're talking about private foundations. So I'm just trying to get to that opportunity that we might have to secure matching funds. Match money.
Yeah, so ARPA funds as a specific source are pretty much gone. There's going to be one last tranche that's going to be sent out. I will say that the county has had really tremendous success with its economic mobility to the suburbs, but they've only received rental projects. They haven't received any home ownership projects. So I think you would kind of blow people's mind by doing a home ownership project. I have every indication that the county is going to continue to do an RFP for that purpose. They've gone from just using ARPA funds to using home funds, which is a source that comes in via the county that Shorewood and others are eligible for. And we'll know in a couple weeks. The county executive will launch his budget, but I would expect that the county would be a strong partner here. At the state level, there was a $500 million allocation by the state legislature and the governor for home ownership opportunities and housing opportunities. The biggest option here is that for that infrastructure cost, you might be able to get a 0% loan and take 30 years to pay it off. So we have lots of partners that are kind of wizards at figuring this stuff out. And we'd be happy to, run some numbers of what this might look like. Yes, there's a tremendous opportunity for partnership and bringing in outside funds to make this happen. I think we could bring in some national money as well. I think that there are several national foundations that are very interested in solving this problem.
Okay.
President McCaig. Okay. Barbara Kylie Melly, one more question.
I always have lots of questions, President McKay. And I know that this has been a project, affordable housing for the CDA for a couple of years. And in thinking about, some of the options that you've discussed or that have been in those other presentations, what concerned me was like a temporary subsidy. So, we subsidize someone of a lower income to get into an apartment. Well, then, what happens when that subsidy runs out? So whether it's a single family home, a condo, a townhouse, whatever, I like the idea of it being a permanent solution or a long-term solution for low income, family or single parent versus, they're going to be subsidized and it's going to be low income, but for how long? Or if we subsidize a developer for an apartment, well, then what, for 10 years? And then he can, rent that apartment at a market rate. So I think that's just something that has concerned me in thinking about this, and that I hope the CDA takes into consideration as you decide which path is the best one for Shorewood.
Okay, I really thank everyone for being here tonight, and Teague, thank you so much for bringing your expertise. I'm not seeing any more hands, and this was just a point of discussion to bring these two bodies up to date with all the information that exists around this issue in particular. I guess at this time, I don't know what we were scheduled to go for, but I'm sure we're over time. Would it be appropriate to adjourn, or was there anything future Manager Ewald that you wanted to share with the group?
I just want to thank you. Just want to thank you for attending tonight and being willing to listen to the journey that we're on and that you could possibly be a part of, given your role and your respective groups. So thank you for coming. And as I guess we continue to have more dialogue and conversation, I'd welcome the opportunity to come back and continue to update you as we hit different milestones when they come.
Yeah, just a level of a round of feedback or show of emoji. Did the groups appreciate coming together to be briefed on this topic? Was this a good use of your time? Kind of a, or did
It was
we lose
great,
everyone?
thanks.
Okay. I don't think we've ever convened the two bodies before, so thank you. All right, with that, I would take a motion to adjourn from the Plan Commission.
I'll make a
make a
motion,
motion.
Dan.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wickland, seconded by Commissioner Kylie Miller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
All right, the Plan Commission is adjourned at 8:17. Is there a motion to adjourn the CDA?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Trustee Stokbrand, seconded by Member Warren, and all those in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, then I really can't. Someone from the CDA, can you say that you're adjourned at 8:17? Well, so noted.
We're adjourned.
CDA is adjourned.
Member Warren, we're adjourned.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm gonna go to bed.
Thank you.
Bye.